Hello, everyone. This is Black Kids in Outer Space show, and today I'm going home again to speak with Damien Goodmon. He's a great friend of mine. Goodman is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Crenshaw Subway Coalition, CSC. CSC and its successor, the organization, the Citizens Campaign to Fix the Expo Rail Line, seeks to empower stakeholder groups in the area of the Crenshaw, Leimert Park, Hyde Park, and highlight the issues of equitable, community-centered transportation to the pursuit of racial and economic justice for South LA. As a result of the organization's effort, over $1.5 billion additional dollars have been invested in the mass transit infrastructure of the Southwest Los Angeles, including the Leimert Park Village and Farmdale stations. Yay!
Yep.
and the Crenshaw LAX rail line. Mr. Goodman has been a guest lecturer on issues of transportation, environmental justice, social activism at the USC, Cal State LA. He's a lead subject of the award-winning documentary Beyond the Echo of the Drum, which premiered to a standing room only audience at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival. Goodman's a graduate of Loyola High School and studied at the University of Washington, where he was a player on the nationally ranked Huskies football team. He's a fourth generation Angelino, as am I, a descendant of Charles and Ellen Blodgett. Mr. Goodman currently lives in Leimert Park, where he is a past co-chair of the Community Neighborhood Council. His family has lived in South Central Los Angeles for over 100 years. And I don't think people who are not from Los Angeles understand the beauty of Los Angeles and understand the power of the Black community in Los Angeles. I think about Paul Williams. And people are like, oh, he was the first Black person on the LA planning board. I'm like, no, he was on the first LA planning board. That's a very distinct difference. So we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to talk about the Crenshaw Mall redevelopment. And first, we want to go into a little bit of history. I noticed that LA Curb was calling it the Baldwin Hills redevelopment plan. So can you give me some information? What's going on in Los Angeles? What's going on? Let me know.
Well, first off, it is so great to continue to watch your progress, sister, even as you have gone to another coast in the beautiful Newark. We continue to reference you lovingly here, and to be able to be on this program and talk about some of the shenanigery that's going on back here, which I think is actually sadly emblematic of a larger problem that we're dealing with in this increasingly gentrified world where, we've been engaged in and fall a victim to politics, where in the past, for decades, there's been an absence of investment, an absence of interest in the urban communities and communities that have become the historic Black communities and urban communities throughout the urban cities throughout the country are now being rapidly gentrified. The biggest project, and I should also mention that one of my additional capacities now is I'm the executive director of Housing as a Human Rights, which is a project of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. I'm still on the Crenshaw Subway Coalition front, obviously. But AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which was initially founded as the AIDS Hospice Foundation, its board more specifically decided that it wanted to be involved in housing and gentrification and adopted this as a advocacy realm in gentrification. So it's a tough challenge, and it's not something that's exclusive to LA. It's not exclusive to Jersey, it's not exclusive to New York. It's throughout the country, throughout the world. AHF is the largest provider of healthcare for HIV and AIDS patients throughout the globe. Is pleased to be involved in it, and I'm happy to be part of this. So these two pieces come in together, and I always preface this conversation around the Crenshaw Mall with the understanding that we did fight, personally, and many others in this community, to have a rail line built on the Crenshaw Boulevard. We felt that as the transit system was expanding, the Crenshaw, where transit riders actually exist, as opposed to needing to create them, which is what they're doing in some parts of the county metro is, deserve to be on that. And we fought to have a station in Leimert Park. We've been in fights and battles with Metro on projects for years. And now, when we established the Crenshaw Subway Coalition, which was again a successor of Fix Expo campaign, we knew there were three objectives that we had. One was to make sure the rail line was built the way the community wanted, and we got some of that. Second was to make sure the rail line was built by the community, because The sad reality is the two hardest places to find a black person in the city of Los Angeles are at a construction site and on a hockey game, and at a hockey game.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third, which is more long term, we knew that rail projects could stimulate economic development around them, although when we were established back in 2008 and then formally in 2011, it was nothing like we're seeing now. But we wanted to see that economic development be done on principles of local economic empowerment. We were talking solidarity economy. We were talking cooperatives, community land trust, ways in which, we could combat or provide an alternative to the traditional means of seeing community take place, which is you bring in a bunch of multinational companies that allow people to not have to drive as far to get them, but at the same time suck the wealth away to the community, take it to shareholders, and provide at best poverty level wages. So the conditions of the community don't change. The conditions of the members of the community don't change. The amenities of the community change. In the process, as we're now seeing, these amenities attract more affluent people, which, given that the situation right now is in gross displacement that is seen, sadly, on the streets of Los Angeles. I think just since you've been on the East Coast, it's been a drastic increase in the last 2-3 years in LA. The majority of those people are black people, or a significant, the plurality, I should say, as high as 40%, despite the fact that black people in the county of LA barely make up 10%. And that's on a good day. And so with the Crenshaw Mall, and it's important to talk about where it is. It's at the intersection of Crenshaw and King. There was a battle that Brother Tory Reese was engaged in trying to get Crenshaw Boulevard changed to Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. And if you know Black LA, you know that Crenshaw and King is the intersection. It's right in Leimert Park, which is the heart, the cultural, the commerce, the political heart of Black Los Angeles. And it's reflected by the population demographics today. It's a community that is got hills in Baldwin Hills, which some people call the Black Beverly Hills, which is actually comical when you actually look at how much money we actually don't have compared to what more affluent areas are. But at the bottom of that hill is Baldwin Village, the jungle as well. And so you have this great wealth disparity between those who are in abject poverty. I mean, people who are making less than $15,000 a year. And those of the hill who are decent middle class. Very few are even upper middle class that you would consider, $150,000, $125,000 a year. The majority of people that live in this community make between or in households that are making between $25,000 and $60,000 a year, which for a black community is good, but relatively speaking, in the broad context of LA, where there's great wealth disparity, is not a lot. Even at the top of the hill, you're looking at about $58,000 per year being the median income. And at the bottom of the hill, it's more like 22. In Leimert Park, which is a working class community, it's more like $36,000 a year for a family of four. And so now that, the gang injunctions have been put in place, they've put politicians in place who talk like they care about black folk, but actually act like they don't care about anything but greed and green. We're now seeing additional focus and investment come from outside parties. And some of these people, I don't know why you're surprised, but some of these people actually look like me and you, Lark.
Of course.
That's why I call it politics. We just had Sidney Kamlacher, who was just elected as an assembly member. And everybody was talking about, it's going to be great because Sidney's a sister. It's a sister's going into office. I'm like, how many times are people going to get duped on this? It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter who you love. Ultimately, y'all are answering to people who would like to see black people further marginalized. And not just black people, but anyone who's on the lower income scale. And she did that. Just a couple of days ago, there were bills on renters' rights. In the middle of a rapidly gentrifying community, the assembly member for the district voted against bills that were widely supported and necessary to protect renters. And it's just emblematic of a problem. The sad thing is she's not alone. She's actually the rule. And there are a few exceptions. There are a couple of exceptions. Maybe in the course of this, I'll talk about some things. But the rule in this community is that the black elected officials in South LA and Inglewood are participating in the cultural erasure of these historic urban communities. Crenshaw Mall development is the largest proposed development in the city of Los Angeles right now. almost 2 million square feet of new development, almost 1,000 units of new housing that are market rate housing. Now, in LA, as I said, in Baldwin Village in the jungle, median household income for a family of four is about $26,000. That's real poverty, right? So their rent has to be insanely low, and that's partially, because people are crowding up, and there is some form of rent control, although it's not strong enough. Market rate units in the city of Los Angeles are only affordable to people who make over $115,000 a year. So when you bring in a project that's got 1,000 market rate units, you're basically saying the project's not for us. And what we have heard from the elected officials, some of them, is that, there's this mythical group of affluent black people who are just going to come in and swoop up all of those units and the community is going to be maintained, which is fantasy. It's not happening anywhere in the country. It's not happening anywhere in the world. In addition to the discrimination and predatory lending that's taking place today, not redlining that's taking place before, but today, black people with the same income and credit score are being denied home loans and refis that white people with the exact same income and credit score are being granted. There's just not enough income for us to compete in this increasingly globalized real estate market. And that's the difference, right? I make a decent wage, far from abject poverty, far from the people on the hill. I make a decent wage. 15 years ago, I would be competitive in finding a house in Leimert Park because they were going for somewhere. You get a fixture up for like 185. Majority of them are going about high twos, low threes. Now the houses, I kid you not, Lark, in Leimert Park, good luck finding one at less than $800,000. There are some on the market for $1 million. $1 million means you need $200,000 just for down payment. It means that you need to carry a note that's $4,000, $5,000 a month. There are not enough black people in LA. There are not enough black people in Southern California, even if they have the good credit, even if they have the income, they can compete against the many people who don't look like us, who are of a wider persuasion, who are unable to afford the communities they live in. Because if they're $1 million here, imagine what they are in Santa Monica. Imagine what they are in Westwood, right? And are now coming in. And our elected officials know that. I mean, they live on the same blocks where when houses go on the market, nobody black pulls them up. I mean, I literally have a story.
How is this? I mean, why is this happening? Like, you kind of put this on social media, and people are like, well, why would a politician do that to our community? Like, kind of, vote against. But go ahead with what you're saying.
So first, there's two pieces. The first, to answer your question, is that they think short term, and while we're playing with people who got a long term game. Mm-hmm. The second is just basic elitism. I've been in meetings where these elected officials and some of the homeowners, although not most of the homeowners are, they're equally amazed that their house is valued at an insane amount. They got in at, $60,000 30 years ago, or they got in at $180,000 15 years ago, and now their houses are worth $1 million. They're like, this is insane. And really, it's false. A false concept of wealth, because they can't afford to take out a loan. The bank would never even allow them to take out that equity, right? They got to be in a certain position to even be able to capture the additional wealth investment. But the majority of them are basically, well, nobody's been focused on the hood, definitely since 92, longer than that. Now we got all these people coming in, let's welcome that change. They are not taking seriously that obligation that elected officials are supposed to have to take care of the least of them, which are plentiful in the South LA, Compton, Inglewood districts. There are plenty of people. When you think about, it actually shocked me how low income it was when we first pulled up the data about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, of what the incomes are in Baldwin Village, which is the jungle. A family of four making $26,000 a year. What is that? That is people who are disabled. That is seniors who are on fixed incomes. Those are people who are formerly incarcerated, who are having difficulty finding jobs. And when you just basically say, we don't care about that, we don't like all the problems, we don't want to deal with those problems, push them out to Palmdale, which is a godforsaken place at 50 miles from the center of LA, and or if they wind up on the street, so be it. And we're going to cater to a more middle-class crowd, which we just know by definition means is not going to look like the community right now. Well, then some people will enjoy that change. Or what is that some people? 63% of the people who live in the Crenshaw district are renters. They're vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of the renters are paying over 50% of their income in rent. Even the homeowners, and this is the piece that most people fail to recognize, even the homeowners are mortgage burdened, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that they are spending over 30, or in some respects, over 50% of their income on their mortgage. What's that mean? That means they're an accident away. It means they're a false police arrest of their kid away from potentially losing their house. And that's what we're seeing. There are those teaser rates, and we still have predatory lending going on. And that's how this cycle takes place. It doesn't take place immediately, although it's rapidly, what we're seeing, it accelerates its pace in large part because of the policies that are implemented, say, citywide. We are being pushed out, and there's a strategy, right? There's a strategy that could be put in place to where we could be trying to recognize that this new investment requires a protective strategy and to be engaged in creating strong deals that do not displace existing residents. No one who is against gentrification, is fighting gentrification, is for things staying the same. No one believes that it's okay that our communities remain food deserts, or that the jobs created, or that there's an absence of economic development that force people to go to jobs up their community. What they all believe, though, is that displacement should not come as a product of development, that we should have development without displacement, that we should have better neighborhoods with the same neighbors. And it's not a crazy concept. I mean, ultimately, why would anyone be in support of projects that ultimately eviscerate the fabric of community, that tear families apart? The few people who actually support some of these projects some of them are misguided, and it just takes a few conversations to get them to understand, including humbling themselves. I love going to the top of the hill, View Park, Baldwin Hills, and asking people to raise their hand if they could afford to buy their house today.
Yeah, yeah.
No one can. And that's the point, right? When people moved into this community, the Leimert Parks, the Inglewoods, the Comptons, and this is throughout the country, right? If with the Black people, when they moved in the community, if the housing prices and the rents were at a level commensurate with what they are today, these would not be Black communities. They wouldn't be brown communities.
And I don't think people truly understand that. I think they feel like this is, oh, it's just lucky and it doesn't matter that you're not going to have anywhere. I'm like, there are very few places like Los Angeles. Me especially being on the East Coast and seeing how, unempowered and disempowered that the African American community is in places like New Jersey and New York makes me really appreciate what we have in Los Angeles, and for people to just give it away for like some money. It's just heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, the reality is, you're gonna get me in trouble though. We've been told that our communities are horrible. We've been told that white ice is colder. It's white supremacy at work. We've been told to hate each other. We've been told that, we shouldn't buy from one another because the quality of the businesses are low. I ain't never been in a liquor store that was owned by someone who was not Black that was suddenly a great experience.
Yes.
I mean, we all go there to get not even liquor, get our, toilet paper or water, and, it's because it's there. But, we've been fed these negative images of self, of community, in an effort to get us to devalue and not recognize our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently, it's not until you have this strong wave where and what most people see, they see the young white couple walking their dog or pushing a stroller. That's like their first view, physical or visual representation of it. But what they feel there, and what that forces them to reconcile, is that the changes that are taking place, and this is where you get many of the homeowners to really recognize the power as to why they need to resist gentrification. The changes that are taking place are not for them. The public and the private sector don't feel us worthy to get the same level of investments that when other people who have slightly more income or a lot more income and are of a paler persuasion come in. And that forces you to recognize you're Black in America. That we live in a society that, excuse me, we live in a society that no matter how middle class we are, no matter how many degrees we have, because the level of education in this community is insane. It's pretty high. No matter if we kept our nose clean and never did anything wrong, we still will not be worthy for the same treatment, the same levels of investment, the same ability to create strong business, strong family. And so it's like that stark representation coupled with that starkness that is losing a home. There are few things that are more important to a person's stability than a roof. Try to do anything without security of a roof over your head, and feeling that vulnerability. And so, it's not, every time I'm in the meeting with folk who are new to the gentrification conversation, they don't have the global context, they haven't gotten it broken down and everything. They just see it. What their response is, the response that they feel emotionally really comes back to what they already know about being a person of color or marginalized in America, that they are vulnerable, that they are at risk, they are not as highly valued. And so, what we've done through the Crenshaw Subway Coalition is attempt to take many of the community leaders through a process where we begin to recognize who the real actors and agents are. As I said, the person who's young, white, and walking their dog and pushing the stroller, that's a legitimate concern, because ultimately when you go from talking about park programs so that kids who have parents that can't afford after school programs, when you go from talking about that to talking about dog parks, there's a problem, right? Folk have the privilege of wanting to focus all their time and attention on dog parks. We got real issues that require, the people who are marginalized got real issues that require different types of investments in our community. And that's a legitimate conflict that you see. But the bigger forces, and this is where we started to get these leaders involved, is to recognize the global capital, the way in which an increasingly smaller group of truly affluent people, the type of people that, make Donald Trump's money look like punk money, have used real estate and speculative investment in real estate as a means of parking the profits that they've been getting, kind of since the Great Recession, the Obama age. We are now at a time of income inequality in America that rivals, actually exceeds the Gilded Age. And most people don't recognize that. I think I blame credit for that.
You don't realize how bad off you actually are right now.
Exactly.
But people will.
Oh, they will.
You'll run out of credit soon.
You will. But back in the Gilded Age, you couldn't get no MasterCard with a high loan that provided you $10,000 and made you thought you had more money than that. You couldn't get a car with a 84-month pay period, right? Now, people have this illusion through this credit that's being provided, and that's, again, it's credit slavery. I mean, we can get into that in a whole nother conversation. But the inequality right now is so great, and it's so disparate that, we don't have enough people of working means that have wealth that can buy product to create factory. And so the wealth, given that it's been accumulated, and there's only so many yachts that a person, and not just the top 1%, not the top 0.1%, the top 0.001% who control the majority of their economy. There's only so many places they can park it. And what they found, given this wealth increase to that uber rich, along with the tearing down of walls, borders, in many respects for financial investment, and just straight up money laundering, is that it's more profitable for them to park their money in real estate in places like San Francisco, LA, New York, Toronto, Sydney, they will get a better return on that long term than they would have in investing in the traditional models in bonds and stock markets and things of that nature. And so they're drastically manipulating the market. You have a lot of other things taking place.
Mm-hmm.
You got the flippers coming in. You've got Airbnb. I don't have any problem with a bed and breakfast in a community that doesn't have hotels, but I don't understand why they need to exist in communities that do, or cities that have hotels. For the people that say that there are people who are paying their mortgage, well, how were they paying their mortgage
We have a
before
comment that
Airbnb
says
came?
credit is a great deceiver. We have a comment that says credit is a great deceiver.
Credit is a great deceiver. It's true, yeah, they will find ways of finding loads of people to further leverage themselves and take out more loans, giving us some illusion and not getting us to recognize that we're working more for less, not just less money, but fewer benefits. And
And
so,
so
where is that wealth going?
so what do we, how can we make it so that we can take the money? Because I remember you wrote something about decommodifying real estate so that we can have universal housing. Are there any plans on how we would do that?
So, I mean, in general, I have said that the two tenets of fighting gentrification, resisting gentrification, were one, protecting the vulnerable. Now, most people will say that's just tenets. Now, given how I look at numbers and mortgage burden, and I see how Black people have been, predatory lending has made them vulnerable to their houses. There's a lot of vulnerable homeowners, and a person who's displaced, clearly more renters will be displaced during a gentrification process, and the first ones out of the small business owners, right? Then the
Mm-hmm.
renters, and then the vulnerable homeowners. We want to protect everyone. So the first is to protect the vulnerable, and there are multiple processes and policies you can put in place, rent control, and things of that nature. But the biggest one is to decommodify housing, basically take as much real estate off the speculative market. And it's a foreign concept here, but not so much in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, I hate to say first world, but affluent European countries, even some countries that are in South America and Asia, there is a significant percentage of housing that does not go into that speculative real estate market, whereby, I'm not exaggerating. When my family was looking for a house in like 99, 2000 Limerick Park, they were going for like 180 on the flagship street. Now those houses are, I'm not even exaggerating, going for 900. Trump didn't come in and put it in gold plate everything. There was no elevator added. 3 stories weren't added to the house. It's speculation. It's this concept that suddenly land value has increased and therefore it demands a greater return. Well, the way you protect against that is to basically say this we're going to have this segment of our housing that is not in that game, allowing to be game from everyone from the realtor that all the way up to the bank, and the private equity firms and investment firms that are banking on this stuff, right? It's called social housing generally. It's not just public housing, and that gets a bad rap here, largely because public housing was solely for the truly needy, and that meant that it was very vulnerable to, and the realtor industry actually get engaged in reducing the maintenance dollars for upkeep. And so that's why it's gotten the bad context and connotation today in America. It was deliberate. When public housing was first established in the U.S., at the same time that other countries were expanding its public housing model, the other countries continued it. They just maintained it. They expanded it to not just include the truly destitute, but in many respects, the middle income, which, the only analogy I can make is like Social Security. If you means tested Social Security, only low income people could do it, then every time Republicans try to privatize it, or Democrats who act like Republicans, who shall not be named, Barack Obama, try and engage in a grand compromise to reduce it, well, now you're just reducing a program that affects poor people, and we know we don't care about poor people in America, right? But because it's got broad appeal and it affects everybody, it's got nothing to do with morality. these people in Congress have no moral concern when they're making their decisions. It's got a broad appeal. And so where you literally have countries that have like 60% of their housing, 80% of their housing is not on the speculative market, well, then that does create a condition where housing is a human right. People are allowed to live in the units without fear of being pushed out at reasonable rates. There's not a need to gouge tenants, which is what we're seeing now with the increasingly corporate landlords and Wall Street investors who are buying up these properties. And so there are ways in which it can be done here, but it's not easy. We are going up against very strong forces, entrenched forces, and now the largest financial instruments in the world, private equity firms, Wall Street investors, they're engaged. It is going to be difficult. Doesn't mean we should stop fighting for it, but that is like the one key thing that we've seen. And when you talk to pretty much anyone that is heavily involved in this, when they talk about this, you've got to find ways of curbing speculation, decommodifying housing. And in America, it's just tough, but it's what they're doing in other parts of the world.
So what, immediately in California, what can, what can people do in regards to like what's coming up in November? Can we briefly talk about like AB 2925, the tenant eviction protection, and I think there's something else. There's another thing that's going on, the AB 1506, the affordable housing to repeal the Costa-Hawkins anti-rent control law. Right. You want to talk about that just briefly or no?
What I'm engaged in what I was on a panel maybe about 6 or 8 weeks ago. I lose track of time, and I realized that this effort to repeal this law, Costa-Hawkins, and we'll get into it in a second, is actually the biggest effort to expand renters' rights in the country's history in definitely generations since either one of us has been alive. And what happened is, in the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s, the apartment owners associations, collaborating with the realtors, were going throughout the country enacting these anti-rent control laws, primarily through the state. Some states just put in outright bans for rent control. Others tried to modify it. In California, our version of that, and they were successful in some places, not successful in others. But in California, our version of that is the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which was passed in 95 and signed by then Republican Governor Pete Wilson, who's famous for, many of his Trumpian Mexican tirades and bills that he pushed and being against affirmative action. California wasn't always blue in the context of America. We got questions as to how blue it is in California, but that's another conversation. So he signed into law a bill that passed by one vote with some Democrat support, a bill that restricts local governments from enacting strong rent control. So you can enact a neutered version of rent control in California today. But you can't do certain things. One is you can't include single-family homes. So all those homes that were foreclosed upon by companies like Blackstone, which is the largest private equity firm in the country, they were given them in the foreclosure crisis on the basis that they could provide some stability, and they send them back out for people to purchase. No, they're holding them. They're securitizing the rental income that they're getting, and gaming it on Wall Street, because they know they can get unlimited amount of money from it. People getting $1,000 rent increases, working class folk. So all of those single family homes can't be rent controlled in any city, no matter if they want to. The second thing it did is it said that rent control could not be enacted for any building built after 1995. And if the city had enacted rent control, then after the year the city enacted rent control. So any building built in the state of California after 1995 can't be rent controlled. And in cities like Los Angeles, which enacted rent control in 78, no building built after 1978. In San Francisco, no building built after 1979. And so all those buildings that were built in those periods of time can't be rent controlled. The big one, though, which is why, we have gone for in places like Northeast LA, Highland Park, right? Um, East LA, Boyle Heights, South LA, Crenshaw Historic South Central. I'll just give you one example. In the jungle, right? In 2001, you probably would have been able to get a 2-bedroom for about $800 a month. And that was working class. And these are nice. These are nice places. I mean, they're big. They're big enough to raise families. And many of us did raise families in them, and have family members that raised families in them, and went to parties in them. Now today, those apartments go for $2,200, but they're in rent control jurisdiction. Why? Costa Hawkins enacted this thing called vacancy decontrol, which basically means anytime a tenant leaves the apartment, the landowner can take the unit up to market rate. They're not restricted by the annual 1%, 2%, 3% increase. No, they can go from having a tenant who was paying $800 a month, who now is either voluntarily leaves, which is sometimes the case, but more often is the case, they're harassed out. They got nefarious means of evicting people. They push that tenant out, and now you go from $800 a month to $2,200 a month. It's why people are buying buildings, not at what the rents are today, because you got a mortgage to pay, but what are the rents they think they can get for evicting people. There's an entire industry of people and of companies that assist investors in evicting tenants after they purchase the units, because they know that they can get more money. And so there's a statewide effort anchored by housing justice groups, several prominent unions. We got the California Teachers Association, which is a powerful union in California. ASME, 3299, United Food Commercial Workers 770, and many others will continue to come on. How economic justice groups, civil rights groups, all are saying that this law has to be repealed. Just let cities, as they choose, if they choose, to enact strong rent control. So we first tried it through the legislative process, AB 1506, and wouldn't you know, the Democratic Party, which has supermajorities in both houses of the legislature, didn't even let the bill come out of committee.
Wow.
That's how entrenched the money is for the industry. I mean, because it's a bill that effectively does not require statewide rent control. That's not what it does. It just says cities that have rent control are able to expand it so that they can take care of the housing affordability crisis as they choose. Didn't even get out of committee. So simultaneous to the process that we're trying to get the bill passed, we submitted language for our ballot statement so that we could take the issue to the voters. And a little bit over 6 weeks ago, we turned in nearly 600,000 signatures, far more than the 400,000 that we needed to put this issue on the ballot in November. And I will say I have a very good friend, multiple friends, but one particular good friend who I sit at a table with regularly, who is in the Black Lives Matter organization, one of the leaders in Black Lives Matter. And I remember when I told them what we were doing, they said, well, we challenge state violence, but you going after people's money. Lots of it. Be careful, brother.
It is. It's actually, it can be more dangerous to go after people's money because you know how it is. You know.
Billions upon billions of dollars are at stake. And we know the campaign against us is we are not going to be able to reach parity. Not at all. They can legitimately dump $150 million of the race. But what we have, unfortunately, is a crisis that no longer simply affects the most marginalized and low income, no longer simply affects Black and brown people. This is a crisis that's so big that middle-class white people are feeling it.
So this is it AB 1506 then?
It failed. And so now we're pushing the Affordable Housing Act, which is the state version, or which is the citizens' version of that'll be on the ballot in November.
Okay.
And we believe that sadly, because the crisis is so great, that there's not a family, even homeowners, for rent control now, because they're seeing that their kids are coming back from college and they can't afford having anything that resembles an apartment. They're moving back into the rooms that they grew up in. We're seeing that their family members can't even think of moving in the community, out of the homes that they're in, into the community they live. the parents that they have when they want to bring them closer to them, but still want some level of independence, can't find spaces. They're seeing the teachers and nurses, California Nurses Association, is one of our key backers. Gotta love the nurses. Can't live anywhere close to the communities where they serve. There's multiple stories, even the Bay Area, and it's not exclusive there, where teachers are commuting 2 hours each way to serve students in San Francisco. Multiple stories of nurses. Nurses make good middle-class wages who were sleeping in parking lots because they can't afford to rent in communities they're serving. And so, sadly, because the crisis is so good, I'm optimistic that the people will allow this to go forward so that we can do something about the housing affordability crisis, because the legislature has failed us. But I am clear that this is going to be a dirty campaign. They're going to lie, cheat, and steal and misrepresent this issue, because there are billions of dollars that these corporate landlords and Wall Street investors have to lose by allowing, grandma to just have a little bit more money in her pocket so she can get the dessert at Denny's every now and then, as opposed to having to cut back and is not pushed onto the street.
Yes. Well, Damien, I have to say, thank you for this was highly informative to, I'm sure, everybody who watched it, and will be informative for the future for people, just because you got down to the nitty gritty of what is going on, not just here in California, but also in Los Angeles, in New Jersey, in New York, in Chicago. We need that kind of people like you to inform the public. So is there anything else that you want to leave us with before we let you go today?
Now, I appreciate you, sister. I mean, we need more independent voices out there who call it like it is. The reality is that while there are many people behind the curtain and they make a lot of money off the suffering of us, there are far too many people in power who claimed to be elected on the mantle of taking care of the marginalized, who hearken back and call themselves as natural successors to civil rights movement giants, who are not just complicit, but participatory in our own economic exploitation, our cultural erasure, our displacement of our communities that we grew up in. And so having voices like yours on the air to hold those people accountable so that people know what's really going on is critical. I'm an organizer. I'm gonna be involved in helping people empower themselves to enact change. But ultimately, the absence of a strong critical media is why these people are getting away with it. And we got to have strong voices like you out there. So we need to do everything we can to support your program, sister. I'm so glad to see you continue to evolve.
All right. Thank you so much, Damien, for all the work that you've done for the last 10, 15 years. We're going to start dating ourselves now. We're going to start pretending we're going to start dating ourselves. Whew. So thank you for coming to Black Kids in Outer Space. We appreciate you. And be safe out there in Los Angeles. Good luck.
I will. You too. Okay. Good speaking to you, sister.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Black Kids in Outer Space. Black kids in outer space. Black kids in outer space. Urban planning, walking, bicycling, and more in our space.